The following is paid advertisement and does not reflect the opinions of this station. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements. The information presented in this program is general and is not intended to be legal advice and should not be relied upon or used without consulting a lawyer to consider your specific circumstances.
Questions about law, stories from the courtroom, cases that might impact your life. It's time for Tell Me I Have a Case with Dan Grimm and Matt Glenn from Cook, Barquette, Ponder, and Wolves. Find them at cbpw-law.com. Here's Dan Grimm and Matt Glenn.
Good morning and welcome back to Tell Me I Have a Case. I'm Matt Glenn alongside Dan Grimm. You can find us at cbpw-law.com and 573-335-6651. It's the weekly show where we give you a chance to take another look at the world of personal injury law. Now, Dan, if we have one common theme in a lot of our cases, they can be car accident cases.
True, very true.
You pulled some stats this week. So tell the folks, how many car crashes are there annually in the United States, or at least were there prior to the pandemic?
Over 6 million car crashes per year in the United States. Shocking.
6 million?
6 million.
How many of those would involve a fatality?
Involving someone, a death in a car accident, over 42,000 people died last year in motor vehicle crashes.
Wow. And then that's in 2021. How many car accidents happened in 2021?
So in 2021, as far as car accidents, as far as 6 million car accidents in 2021, 42,000 people, over 42,000 people died, which comes out to be almost 17,000, over 17,000 car accidents per day.
Wow.
Per day.
That's in 50 states.
Yes.
Wow. Well, I'd do the math for you, but that's just not why I'm here.
Right.
So we thought it might be interesting, since so many people do get hurt in a car crash. Some of you are going to have that happen to you, and some of you are going to know someone who it happens to. Many times the treatment that you go to initially is at an emergency room. So we're joined today by Dr. Chad Armstrong. He's an emergency room physician at St. Francis Medical Center here in Cape Girardeau. Chad, thanks for joining us.
Well, good to be with you.
Just a little bit of background. Where did you go to medical school?
I attended medical school at Kansas City University of Medicine and Biosciences in Kansas City, Missouri.
Okay. And how did you become an ER physician?
After medical school, I guess I chose a residency in emergency medicine, so then I completed the residency in emergency medicine at Integra Southwest Medical Center in Oklahoma City.
And then how'd you find your way to Cape Girardeau?
Found my way to Cape, family and job opportunity, job availability.
Great.
And Dr. Armstrong, tell us, for the people that don't know, what's it like in, a day in the life of a ER doctor, an emergency room physician?
Well, most ERs have you show up, you don't know what you're going to see that day. You don't have a set schedule as to what patients are coming in or what their complaints are going to be. Whatever people walk through the door, you see. Could be a day that relatively minor cough, cold, sniffles, and could be a day with a lot of serious illnesses or even serious traumas, or a mixture of any of the above.
And you heard us talk about the statistics involving motor vehicle crashes, injuries, death. Are motor vehicle crashes something you commonly see day in and day out in the emergency room at the hospital?
We do see a fair share of motor vehicle accidents. Some days are lighter, other days are heavy in motor vehicle accidents, but we do see a fair share of them.
So, doctor, if you have somebody who comes into the emergency room and they have suffered a traumatic injury, what are the first steps that you take in treating that patient?
First steps are, evaluating the patient, make sure evaluation and look at things to do quickly to stabilize them. If they don't need anything along those lines, then we spend ordering tests to rule out whatever we're concerned with.
Yeah, and I've heard the term differential diagnosis. What is a differential diagnosis?
A differential diagnosis is based upon a given complaint, would be a range of things that could be wrong with the patient.
And when you said a moment ago you want to rule out things that could cause serious harm or even death, you would put something you think could cause that on the differential. Is that right?
Yes, we would.
Okay. So let's say hypothetically somebody gets into a car accident and they come to the emergency room complaining of neck pain and low back pain. What sorts of things might you put on the differential in that situation?
Neck, low back pain, based upon injury, or mechanism. Injuries to be simple bruises. You can have sprains and strains. You can also even have fractures.
And how would you go? Which one of those would you want to rule out first?
Really, we're in the emergency room. We are ruling out fractures. So X-rays and CAT scans are what we use for that.
And why do you want to rule out a fracture? Why is that important to the patient?
Fractures, whether it's back or even limb, can cause, one, increasing pain, but two, they can also cause further injury with the back protecting the spinal cord.
And worst case scenario, if somebody has spinal fracture, what's their worst case?
Worst case with spinal fractures can be injury to the spinal cord, then causing paralysis.
So a CT scan, that would rule out the fracture. Would a CT scan show, say, a torn ligament or a herniated disc in the spine?
CT scans have come a long way. They at times can show some disc, the bulging disc, but they cannot show injury other than that to the disc. They cannot show ligament injuries.
Okay. And so what, if you rule out the sort of they're paralyzed, what then is the next step for that patient?
The majority of the time, the next step is with no fractures would be follow up with their doctor to have further evaluation if need be in a couple of days. Okay.
Might you prescribe pain medication if the pain was severe enough?
Yes, we might. Depending upon the doctor, depending upon the situation, pain medication might be prescribed.
How long typically are your prescriptions for?
Prescriptions in the emergency department, due to federal regulations, are for the most part only 1 to 2 days.
And again, that's so they can follow up then with their primary care physician and maybe develop a plan to treat that sprain. Is that fair?
Correct. Fair enough.
Doctor, what about if somebody hits their head in the collision, in a motor vehicle collision, on the steering wheel, on the side window, an airbag, and has headaches, maybe loss of consciousness? Is it important for somebody at that point in time to go to an ER to be checked out and evaluated?
It is important at that point with those types of injuries and complaints to be evaluated.
What would be your differential diagnosis for an injury like that?
The big differential that we worry about with those types of things are bleeding on the brain.
Why is that important to rule out or rule in?
If there is significant bleeding on the brain, or if the bleeding continues, then that can cause strokes, paralysis, death.
How would you go? Yeah, sorry, doctor. How would you go about ruling that out?
We use a CAT scan.
In some situations, might you use an MRI in that case too?
For the most part, MRIs are not used out of the emergency department.
Okay.
So that would be something, if a CAT scan was normal or negative, then further evaluation, if deemed necessary by the ER doctor, the trauma surgeon, the neurosurgeon, they could possibly be admitted, or it's something that they could be discharged and have follow-up and have their physician order as an outpatient study.
And that's an interesting one you touched on there. You might bring in other physicians. As an emergency room doctor, you specialize in acute trauma care. Is that right?
Yes, the emergency room physician specialize in basically triaging and stabilizing patients and treating any life-threatening conditions.
And to do that, you might call in a specialist. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And when the patient leaves the ER, your job is to stabilize the patient before they leave, right?
Correct.
But often their care doesn't end when they leave the ER. Is that correct?
Correct. We always recommend that they follow up with their doctor within a couple of days.
And often, like maybe like an X-ray is read as normal, or CT is read as normal. When we're talking about ligament injuries or disc injuries, in between the vertebrae of the spine, what is a gold standard as far as testing to see if somebody has disc injuries or ligament injuries? What would be the gold standard for testing?
A gold standard for disc and ligamentous injuries would be MRI.
And that's something that a patient, once they leave the ER, can have done outside the hospital through their doctor or an orthopedic doctor?
Absolutely. Their doctor can order it. They could see the specialist, the orthopedic, the neurosurgeon. They could see whoever and have that test ordered.
So as I understand it, then your role is making sure the patient is not going to become paralyzed or become measurably worse. Is that what you mean when you say stable?
Correct.
And then once you've done that, then as Dan said, then they're discharged.
Yes.
And just like I talk to my family and even myself. I mean, I'm always of the position I'd rather be safe than sorry. After a motor vehicle crash, is it a good practice for people to go to the ER and to be checked out? Is that something that you as an ER doctor? I mean, do you find that's important?
It's one of those things that, every situation can be different, and it's tough to really say and give a list of absolutes as far as being evaluated in the emergency department. But what I will say is, I mean, we specialize in seeing, the patients, the acutely injured, and evaluating them. If you have any concerns, we are there to evaluate and take a look at you and determine if there's something more that needs to be done.
And we've been talking to our guest, Dr. Chad Armstrong, an emergency room physician at St. Francis Medical Center here in Cape Girardeau. Dr. Armstrong, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you, doctor.
So that does it for our first segment. We're back in a few moments to take a look at the treatment after you leave the ER. You've been listening to Tell Me I Have a Case with Dan Grimm and Matt Glenn. Find us at 573-335-6651.